Taking 27 years to complete, its builders would cut, haul and place 6 million tons of limestone to construct the last surviving and oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Marvelling at it 4 millennia later, Napoleon famously said it contained enough stone to build a wall 3 meters high around France. Today, on The Ancient Egyptian, we take a look at the development and the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. To begin to understand why the ancient Egyptians built enormous pyramids, we need to start at the beginning of time. According to the Egyptian creation myth, at the dawn of time there was nothing but watery chaos in complete darkness. Then, rising out of the water, the first mound of earth, a golden pyramid upon which the god Ra created the heavens and the world. Every ancient Egyptian temple would bear testament to this myth. An elevated mound would always be located at the center. Like the cross to the Christian faith, the pyramid was the holiest symbol to the ancient Egyptians. It was synonymous with Egypt, representing eternal life. The value that ancient Egyptians placed on life is littered across temple walls and art. In short, they loved life and had no concept of a different kind of existence like what most modern religions teach today. The ancient Egyptian idea of the afterlife was simply an infinite extension of the lives they already had. To achieve this, the ancient Egyptians devoted their service to build bigger and better iterations of pyramids as a machine of resurrecting the deceased pharaoh so he can rise, like Ra, into the sky to eternally watch over Egypt. The theme of death and rebirth is central to ancient Egyptian belief. As the sun sets in the west each night, it rises again in the east. And as the Nile flood recedes and the seeds are planted, green shoots of crops rise which will feed the country. But most importantly, in return for all their effort, the ancient Egyptians too would reach the afterlife, guaranteed by the deceased pharaoh. It may surprise you to learn that the pyramids arose not long after the beginning of Egyptian civilization. Mounds of earth heaped above a burial chamber had been in practice since the earliest pharaohs, but it was during the Old Kingdom that the pyramid came into being. Also known as the Pyramid Age, it was the first great period in Egyptian history. Egyptian soldiers were taking their first steps outside of Egypt's borders. There was a functioning central government, a flourishing economy, and a prosperity seen nowhere in the world until that point. With a bulging treasury from bountiful harvests and the foreign luxuries brought home by new conquests, the pharaoh had the capability to build larger and grander monuments. Every mortuary monument throughout Egyptian history would be built on the west bank of the Nile, the realm of the dead, for beyond the cliffs of the Western Valley, according to Egyptian myth, Ra's boat would descend into the underworld each night to be reborn each morning in the eastern sky, a route trodden by all Egyptians in search of the afterlife. The first pharaoh of the third dynasty, which began the Old Kingdom in 2686 BCE, was called Djoser. He wanted a tomb that would be visible from the capital city of Memphis, which sits near to Egypt's modern capital city, Cairo. All tombs that had come before were called mastabas, which is the Arabic word for bench. These were massive rectangular stone structures that were literally built above a burial chamber dug into the ground. The aim was for that structure to symbolise the first pyramid-like mound at the beginning of time and resurrect its occupant underneath. Joseph's vizier, Imhotep, not to be confused with a complete fictional character from the 1999 film The Mummy, devised a radical new design. His plan, at a site called Saqqara opposite ancient Memphis, was to build several mastabas on top of each other of diminishing size. The final result would be called a step pyramid. Another name given by ancient Egyptians were the steps to heaven. This structure relied on the bricks leaning slightly toward the centre so the whole structure rested against itself. A couple of generations later, from 2613 BCE, a new pharaoh called Sneferu of the 4th dynasty would take this design to new levels of beauty and perfection. His first pyramid was originally a step pyramid, much like Joseph's, at a site called Maidoun, just under 60 miles south of Memphis. But Sneferu would try to go one better, and he did this by filling in the steps so they would have smooth edges resembling a true pyramid. The reason why he filled in the steps was it was believed that a pyramid should not be completed before a pharaoh's death. So they first added more layers, and then they filled them in. Another development was the construction of chambers inside the pyramid structure, instead of underground chambers in pyramids that had come before. These rooms all had a corbelled ceiling, where the blocks were stacked progressively inwards, meaning the roof would be able to handle the weight above. This was repeated successfully in Sneferu's later pyramids, and in the Great Pyramid. Unfortunately, on the outside, filler stone which had been added to attempt the true pyramid began to slip, causing the pyramid to collapse, leaving the pyramid core we see today. Undeterred, he tried again, at a new site called Dashur, not far from Saqqara. This pyramid was designed from the start to be a true pyramid, and if kept to plan, may well have been the Great Pyramid we know today. But a problem occurred with this too. The ground was not strong enough to hold the weight, and the internal chambers began cracking. The builders had not factored in securing the foundations. The angle of incline was shifted to 43 degrees halfway up the pyramid from the original 54 degrees to finish it, giving it the name the Bent Pyramid, but because of the damage to the existing stone, it was unusable. Sneferu's last pyramid was an incorporation of all the lessons he had learned: a strong foundation, a workable degree angle, and an intact burial chamber. Known as the Red Pyramid, this was Sneferu's final resting place. Around 2550 BCE, his son Khufu, or Cheops in Greek, would focus all his energy on just one pyramid, the greatest pyramid of them all. He would no doubt throughout his days as prince and heir been assisting his father's architects, and be privy to all the latest engineering developments. He also would understand the tremendous labour and economic requirements to supply long-term building projects. However, before a stone was laid, or a grain of sand swept away, an important event had to take place. The stars Ursa's Major and Minor revolve around a dark point that never moves in the night sky. This spot was revered as eternal. It was between those stars that the ancient Egyptians believed the previous pharaohs lived and continued to look down on Egypt to protect and provide. Khufu's architects had to pinpoint a vertical alignment between these stars, which were also known as the circumpolar stars. At night, an official with a plumb bob with a line of string held it up to the night sky. The pyramids had to be in exact alignment for the pharaoh to take his place amongst his ancestors. I'll come back to why this was important a bit later in the video. Meanwhile, the detail on the ground goes further. After the ceremony, construction started small and with intricate care. A base of 13 acres would be cut into the bedrock, using gravity and water to perfect the horizontal base. All four edges of the Great Pyramid would align perfectly with the compass points, a margin of error measured to within a fraction of an inch. The precision of this job would have been carried out by specialist stonemasons, but for the pyramid itself, builders would be required in large numbers. This was achieved through an early version of conscription. There is absolutely no evidence of slavery, unfortunately a later invention of visiting ancient Greeks and sensationalized by Hollywood. Officials would sail up and down Egypt looking for able-bodied men to work on the Pharaoh's pyramid. This would be seasonal, occurring while the Nile flood was high, and there would be no risk of the farmers' fields being neglected. The conscripts would be required to work for several months before returning back to their homes to sow their farms and collect the harvest. The crucial aspect of this was because the Nile flooded each year, covering the farmers' fields, there was a large body of ancient Egyptians who were available for work. The routine for them at the pyramid site was to work for 9 days and rest on the 10th. They were divided into gangs of about 40 men who could be subdivided when necessary, and they were tasked with hauling stone, assisting masons, or working in support industries. We even know of some of their names because of the graffiti they left inside some chambers. One gang were called the Boatmen of Khufu, another more simply, the Pure. An entire city was built to house them at a place called Giza, still a modern Cairo suburb today. In this city, aside from where the workers ate and slept, there were ranches for cattle, temples, medical stations, bakeries, potters, and other industries. Overseeing the workers was the chief architect Hemienu, a cousin of Khufu's. It was his job to make sure the construction proceeded on time and to plan. It was also his responsibility to ensure enough materials were in ready supply for the construction. It's a misconception that the entirety of the Great Pyramid was built using stone on site. Instead, the blocks that make up the inner pyramid were mined on site. The white limestone casing stones came from a place called Chura, which was across the Nile to the southeast of Memphis. The burial chamber was built using the finest granite, mined at a quarry over 500 miles to the south in Aswan. This stone was the strongest known to the Egyptians, and therefore most likely to protect the body of the pharaoh. It would be transported on huge barges, the only means of shifting any material over any reasonable distance at that time. Specialist canals were dug to ensure material came to the pyramid base, rather than them risking sinking in the Nile mud. I think what makes the Great Pyramid construction that bit more of an achievement is the metal that was used to cut the majority of the stone, and that metal was copper. It was the hardest metal known to the ancient Egyptians at the time, and was notoriously brittle and blunts easily. Imagine cutting 2.3 million blocks using only a metal chisel that blunts after 100 blows with a wooden hammer. When a block had been cut by specialist stonemasons, it had to be hauled to the pyramid site from the adjacent quarry. This was the job of a work gang, who I mentioned earlier. They had no wheels or horses, so instead they just used rope and sliders while workers with water soaked the ground in front of the stone to prevent friction and drag. It is worth mentioning that the core of the pyramid was made up of irregular blocks and rubble. The reason for using what we would call filler is that if the builders were to cut every block with the care and precision of the outer stones, the building process would have taken many years longer to complete. There are different theories to how the Great Pyramid was constructed. Some think aliens, and despite there being no evidence of this, is still popular in the imagination. Others think that there was a giant ramp that went to the top, although the amount of stone needed to construct such a structure would be impractical. The most accepted one academically is that there was a giant ramp that extended to the first third of the pyramid, and after that a side ramp snaked its way toward the top. At the summit, a specially carved capstone was carefully put in place which would be cased in gold. The reason for this was to mimic the point at which Ra ascended into the heavens, as his spiritual descendant Khufu intended to follow. Also, gold was believed to be the skin of the gods, and as the sun was synonymous with Ra, the closest point of contact between mortal Egyptians and the god had to be respectfully coated. As the pyramid was being completed, the finishing stone was white limestone which was cut to give a smooth finish. The effect on completion would have been blinding during the day and would have been visible throughout the capital region of Memphis. Initially standing at 481 feet, it would be the tallest building on the planet until the Eiffel Tower was built in 1889. However, the entire outer casing stones would be removed to build medieval Cairo, lowering the height to today's accepted figure of 454 feet. As a point of clarity, there is a subterranean chamber, but there is no evidence it was used or even finished. Its purpose is still the subject of research, but the lack of breathable air for the builders could be a factor. The structure above has two complete rooms as well as galleries and shafts. The first is the so-called Queen's Chamber, but the name is deceptive. There is no evidence a burial ever took place in this chamber. The term came from later Arab explorers who remarked the design was similar to their own queen's tombs. What this room was for is still being investigated, and we may never know its purpose. This chamber, like the next, has shafts in its north and south walls, which I'll come back to in a moment. Ascending a grand gallery with a rise of 69 feet, the ceiling is a particular architectural wonder. The scale seems much larger than it is. Exiting the grand gallery, the king's chamber is where the body of Khufu was laid to rest. The sarcophagus to the side was a granite box that housed his mummy. I want to point out here that there is no evidence of fantastical riches ever being placed here. That tradition belongs to a later age of Egyptian history. Khufu's coffin too was not of the style we associate with Tutankhamun. Instead, it was most likely made of cedar wood. To protect the chamber, built above, there were 5 successive cavities topped with an inverted V structure. The point of these was to relieve downward pressure from the weight of the pyramid above. Elsewhere in the king's chamber, the 2 so-called air shafts since their discovery have generated some debate. I want to dispel the notion that these were for air ventilation. The effort involved is far too intricate for just breathable air for an occupant who would not be breathing mortal air. The most accepted theory is that the king's and queen's chambers' north shafts were aligned with one each of the circumpolar stars, what the ancient Egyptians called the indestructibles, the subject of the ceremony before the pyramid was built. As these stars only moved around a dark still point, it was there that the pharaoh spirit would go to sit in eternal watch over Egypt. The south shaft pointed to Orion's belt, where Pharaoh's eternal father Osiris dwelt. It was also where, at the advent of the Nile flood, that the Sirius star of Isis would be visible through the Queen's Chamber south shaft. While subject to debate, I'm speculating here, and suggesting their purpose was to direct Khufu's spiritual father and mother, the god Osiris and goddess Isis, to come together to conceive Horus. As Pharaoh Khufu would be the embodiment of Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, his continuation of eternal kingship was dependent on this event. The pyramid acted as a womb. The aim was for the pharaoh to be reborn by his parents, whose union through their light making him immortal in the afterlife. The pyramid text found in the Pyramid of Unas at Saqqara, a 5th dynasty pharaoh, are our only evidence on what the function of the pyramids were. They were a set of spells and instructions for the journey of the pharaoh's soul to eternal life, where he would live with the gods among the imperishable stars. The Great Pyramid acted as a machine of resurrection for its occupant and launched him into the afterlife. It's important to note that it was not just the Great Pyramid that was under construction. In its shadow were 3 pyramids for the wives of Khufu. Further to the west were mastaba tombs to protect officials and family members, including Hemienu. This was considered a tremendous honour, as the entire site would be considered holy and show their status in the afterlife. There was also a long causeway stretching to the Nile River, as well as a mortuary temple to the east for Khufu to be worshipped after his death. There are some suggestions, although I disagree, that the Great Sphinx also was constructed at this time. While it's the topic of another video, I will say that for me the likeness to Khafre, Khufu's son, is too strong for me to be persuaded otherwise. There was also a large boat buried next to the Great Pyramid. Discovered in 1954, it was comprised of cedar wood from Byblos in modern-day Lebanon, a precious material at the time. Even more so today, as there are no cedar trees left big enough to construct such a craft. Often named the solar bark, it had a crucial symbolic function. There were only two modes of transport besides your feet in ancient Egypt: boat or donkey. Every city or destination was on the Nile, so a boat could take you any long-haul journey. A donkey was for any short-haul distance. But the Great Pyramid was not just for Khufu. For the thousands of Egyptians that had worked on this monument, they believed there was a place for them too in the afterlife. Their tombs are still being discovered a stone's throw away from their pharaoh's pyramid. For commoners to be buried anywhere near royal monuments was a great honour, and showed the value Khufu placed on his workers. Yet history has been unkind to Khufu. Greek explorer Herodotus, after consulting with Egyptian priests and historians 2,000 years after the pyramid construction, had a dim view. This is what he said: Cheops was such a despicable person that when he was short of funds, he took his own daughter to a house of ill repute and ordered her to earn a certain amount of money. She managed to get the required amount of money together and decided that one day she too would have a monument made to herself. Each man who visited her was asked to bring her a stone to use in building the monument. These stones are said to have been built in the middle of the three pyramids, which stands in front of the big pyramid. While a ridiculous anecdote, I think it attests to a possible bad reputation for Khufu recorded in temple libraries. Why this is, we are not sure. Sources also claim Khufu shut down temples which were centres for economic and social life. It may also account for his only surviving likeness being a small figurine. There would be two more pyramids shown in Khufu's at Giza. His son Khafre would build one next door, with a height just shorter than his father's at 448 feet. His grandson, Menkaure, would complete the trio with a much smaller pyramid at 213 feet. While these two pyramids will be included in a future video, it's important to note the declining size of the monuments. This tied into the waning power of the pharaoh as the 5th dynasty of pharaohs came to power after the death of Menkaure around 2504 BCE. While still building pyramids as tombs, like these at Abu Siah, their materials were less sturdy and shows the economy wasn't as strong. The cost of building multiple pyramids for over 100 years took a mighty toll both financially and in manpower. Emptying the royal treasury ebbed away the power of the pharaoh, leading to regional rulers declaring independence. It was during the 6th dynasty that the fall of the Old Kingdom would come, which would lead to tremendous turbulence in Egypt. The power of the pharaoh would be replaced by regional warlords. The Great Pyramid would be robbed and Khufu's mummy destroyed. Pyramids on the scale of Giza, or even Abu Siah, would never be built in Egypt again. But the Great Pyramid would face threats to its existence since the fall of ancient Egypt too, and that came from Caliph Abdullah el-Mamun, who ruled Egypt from 820 to 827 CE. Convinced there was treasure inside, he wanted to tear the whole pyramid down to find it. Fortunately for us, the calculation for the work to demolish the Great Pyramid would cost more than Egypt's annual income. Instead, an entrance was knocked through on the north side, still visible and used today. While contemporary sources speculated that gold in Khufu's mummy was found, we cannot verify for sure what al-Mamun's officials discovered. And so in the 21st century, the Great Pyramid still stands despite the ravages of war, vandalism, and the relentless winds of time. I think what's most impressive of all about this monument is it's the closest thing we have in human history to eternal. The ultimate human response to the question of what happens when we die. The greatest of all questions provoked the greatest human response 4,500 years ago as a way to answer them. So I want to leave you with a 12th century Arab proverb, as relevant today as it has been since when it was first uttered. Man fears time, but time fears the pyramids. I want to take this chance to say a big thank you for watching and supporting this channel. Comment down below to let me know what you think of the video and your own thoughts on the Great Pyramid. Please drop a like, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll never miss a future video.